Christmas break is over. The Flames are back in action, and there is lots to get into and chat about. Great to be back with you after a week off here on the Red Melbourne. Hope everyone is nice and full of eggnog and turkey, just like I am. Welcome inside the Red Mal Rundown. I am your host, Johnny Dope. Alongside me, as always, Robert Munich. Robert, how are you? How was Christmas?
Yeah, Christmas is great. Holidays have been really good so far. Nice to take a few days off work as well, get some time off and watch some hockey. I was able to get out to a Wranglers game and some Circle K Classic games, so it's been really good so far. How about yourself?
Yeah, Christmas was good. The kids were hyper. The sports calendar was very kind. I was able to get to see the Chiefs take that number 1 seed, watch Canada lose to Latvia, all the good stuff around the holiday seasons. Robert, Flames back in action as the unofficial second half of the season's underway here. The post-Christmas schedule is going away here. We're going to do something a little different here on the show here. You brought up a really good idea. Let's look ahead to 2025 and what we are looking forward to and some storylines around the Calgary Flames. You should start us off here since it was your idea. What do you have at the top of your list of storylines for the Calgary Flames?
Yeah, I was thinking about like a few different things that I think are going to be really interesting to watch in 2025. And the first one that came to my mind was just like what the plan is going to be moving forward here. Are the Calgary Flames going to go into a rebuild? Probably not. I think, they've made it abundantly clear that they're not going to do that. Are they going to continue to retool? Are they going to continue to move out some veterans and bring in NHL players and some picks and prospects? Or are they going to try to take the next step? Kind of like what they did in 2015. They had the 14-15 season where they made the playoffs. They played kind of over their head, over their skis. And I'm kind of getting some similar vibes right now in the 2024-25 season that I was in 14-15. Just that the team's competitive. They're hovering around a playoff spot. Do Craig Conroy, Don Maloney, Murray Edwards, do they look at this team and say, you know what, we're a lot closer to being competitive than we think. I think it's time to take the next step, just like they did in 2015. I'm really curious to see what happens this offseason. This trade deadline and then heading into the offseason. I think it's going to be fascinating to see which direction this team goes in because, as we all know, Murray Edwards loves a competitive team. He loves to squeak into the playoffs and get his first round revenue. Is he going to try to do that this deadline? Are they going to try to become a playoff team in the summer? That's something I've got my eye on.
Yeah, that's the Murray Edwards thing always likes to loom its head around this time of the season, right? Any sort of success we see Murray Edwards think, we're close enough, right? And tries to go for it. That kind of ties on to my first one that I was thinking about, Robert, was how sustainable is what we're seeing from the Flames through the rest of this season. Pretty decent opening 30-ish games from the Flames. This team tends to find ways to pull wins out where they shouldn't pull wins out. Low-scoring affairs, hard-fought hockey. How sustainable is it with this group to be able to continue that success that this team has found, which I think will tie in really directly to what this management team is thinking of. We hear about 5-year plans. We hear about long-term goals, but we also hear about we want to be a competitive playoff team at the same time. And I don't know if you can do both and have it both ways, but I really wonder how sustainable the way the Flames are playing right now can be over the course of the month and a half to 2 months till the trade deadline, because I think that'll tell you a lot about what Craig Conroy has to do and should do. And I know they aren't always the same thing at the trade deadline here. So I wonder how that will tie into your point there, Robert, how this team plays versus what this management team thinks this team is going to be.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if they can keep this up. I mean, to your question, is it sustainable? I think the only way that it is that if Dustin Wolf and Dan Vladar continue to give you top 10 goaltending in the NHL, those two guys have masked up a lot of deficiencies with this team this year. I mean, like we know, like this team can't score. Like it's so difficult for this team to score goals, and it's going to be almost impossible to make the playoffs if they continue scoring at this rate. So what are they going to have to do to make up for that? Well, it's Dustin Wolf's going to have to continue to play out of his mind. Dan Vladar's going to have to continue to give you pretty quality starts against good competition, and the team in front of him is going to have to play, that kind of shutdown defensive hockey where they have to commit to blocking a ton of shots, and they have to commit to playing physical, to sacrifice offense in order to keep the puck out of their own net. I don't know if that's sustainable. It's asking a lot of Dustin Wolf, who's a rookie in the NHL. He's only 22, 23 years old. That's putting a lot of pressure on a rookie goaltender to say, hey, you need to continue carrying this team, and if you don't, well, we're not going to make the playoffs. That's a lot to put onto Dustin Wolf, right?
Yeah, it absolutely is. It's a lot to ask of Dan Vladar as well, a guy who hasn't ever really carried the load of a team, to be that veteran to back up Dustin Wolf and to help him carry that load. When you're only scoring 2.5 goals a game on average, well, it's 2.6 according to the app that I have here. That's asking a lot of your goaltenders, hey, you got to allow 2 or less for us to win these hockey games. You allow 3 goals and we cannot win hockey games. That's a tough way to play hockey. That's a tough way to be consistent. And it's hard every single day to go out there and battle. And if you give up that first goal, like you're always chasing it. And that's just a tough way to play hockey. Regardless of how good your goaltending is, that's still a tough way for you to try to get wins. They have to find a way to get to another level here. I just don't think they're good enough to do that. So I think Craig Conroy here really needs to take an honest assessment of this team and what he's seen. And yes, they're pulling out some of these weird victories. They've had a few third period comebacks. They're able to get some wins that they probably shouldn't have gotten. But you see some of these hockey games, you see the way that they're playing here. And I don't know how Craig Conroy can look at this group and be like, listen, let's just add to this group because we're right there. You're right there only on paper, in my opinion. But if you dive beyond just the box scores and beyond the standings, this team's a little ways off from being a playoff contender. And so that's why I brought up is it sustainable? Because what actually is this team? Because on paper, 2.6 goals for every single game, and you're allowing over 3. Obviously, that's not a recipe for success or to win hockey games.
Yeah, and like just watch the Calgary Flames play hockey. If you watch this team play, say, 15 or 20 games, and you come back to us and say, you know what, I think this is a playoff team, I have to seriously question what you're watching. Like, it's just like the eye test alone says it all, in my opinion. There's a lot of nights where Calgary is the second best team, and they get wildly outskilled by the better teams in the NHL. And it's so obvious that they're not a true contender. Could they potentially sneak into the playoffs in the 8th seed? Sure. And that's because the Western Conference has been pretty garbage outside the top 7 teams this year. Like, Vancouver is turning into a soap opera and a disaster. And, Utah's not quite there. Like, there's a chance for them to actually get into that 8th seed, but what's it gonna do? It's gonna be a waste 8 days, like Daryl Sutter says. So it's interesting. I mean, kind of going back to like my first point there, I want to ask you, do you think there's any chance that Murray Edwards and company say, all right, we were super competitive this year, we're hovering around a playoff spot all year, it's time to take the next step? Do you see any world where that actually happens?
I see a world where Murray Edwards sees the 8th spot and says, we're a playoff team, so make it so, Craig, and brings back the same mantra that plagued Brad Treliving for years of it's playoffs, and that's what we're after. I feel we've seen this before where Murray Edwards, quote unquote, lets the team rebuild or retool, but it's a year, maybe 2 years max. And then he's like, let's get back to these playoffs because he likes his revenue. He likes it. He doesn't. I've said this before on the podcast. He doesn't seem to be a guy who likes to look long term. He likes the now, the money now, the revenue now, the success now, because that's what some business is like. but I don't know if I see a world where Murray Edwards allows Craig Conroy to actually get 3, 4, even 5 years to actually retool and rebuild his team before he has to jump in here and say, okay, we almost saw 8th spot, good enough, let's go. That's where I see Murray Edwards at.
I kind of see it the same way too. And the one thing that comes to mind is you look at the Flames salary cap space. What if Murray looks at the cap space and goes, okay, we got anywhere between $20 to $26 million in cap space to spend. We're $26 million away from the salary cap this season, and we're still hovering around a playoff spot. We're still gunning for that 8th spot. Imagine what this team could be if we spend at the cap, Craig Conroy. We could be a playoff team. And then I also wonder, does Murray almost look at what the Washington Capitals did in the offseason last summer and say, we could do that? Because Washington, they had the established group of young players there with McMichael and Poitras and guys like that. Maybe he's thinking, Coronado and Zary are that for us. Why don't we go out, spend some draft picks and trades, bring in a Pierre-Luc Dubois, bring in an Andrew Mangiapane, go out, spend big money on a top 4 defenseman like Matt Roy. Now the Washington Capitals, they're a top 10 team in the league, and they look really good. They look really solid.
Yeah.
Does Murray Edwards look at that example and go, holy crap, like this is something that we could do? Because, we're in the same boat that Washington was last season. And if we go out and spend our cap space and we go out and trade for a couple guys, like, can we become a top 10 team? I really wonder if something like that goes through Murray Edwards' head with kind of the way things are going right now.
It's like you're in his office. I really see a world where Murray Edwards says no, re-sign Rasmus Anderson if he wants to. If Rasmus wants to stay, give him the 8-year deal, $8 million or whatever it ends up being at the term. Go out there and find yourself another guy for that back end. Use that money. Exactly what you're just saying there. Do the Washington Capital thing. I honestly think that's the road that we're headed to, especially if the Flames hover where they are hovering for the rest of the season. If they're hovering in that 9th, that 8th spot, Murray Edwards is going to see, hey, we just made the playoffs and, we're good. Double down on it, or we just miss. Use that cap space and get us over the hump. I honestly see that's where it has to be. That's where I don't like wishing for my team to lose, but that's where I hope it kind of drops off for the Flames. Drop off, become the team on paper that you should be, rather than this. Well, this team is playing above over their skis right now. They are playing better than they should be, getting results that they probably shouldn't be getting. Fall back to where you were, and then force the hand a little bit of Murray Edwards to hold himself back and allow Craig Conroy another year or two to try to build this up here. Because if you're in this murky middle that we've always seemed to have in Calgary, I honestly see Murray Edwards going, yep, let's go. Double down. Let's go to these playoffs because we need the revenue.
I do too. And you always hear Craig Conroy and some people in the Calgary media talk about how they do have a long-term plan. But I just don't know if I buy it, man. I don't know if Murray Edwards is going to allow Craig Conroy 3 or 4 years to get this team to where it needs to be. I think he's super impatient.
When you and I think long-term plan, we think 3 to 5 years, maybe 6 years. I think when Murray Edwards thinks long-term, it's what is your 18-month plan? What's going to get us through the rest of this season and next season, and then let's go. I honestly think he is that short-sighted, and I don't want to talk bad about the guy. He's clearly a savviness to how you conduct your business, but I think he plans so short-term that a long-term plan to this guy is 2 seasons, a season or 2, and that's a long-term plan for this guy because he likes it. Revenue every single year. Whereas you and I are like, well, a general manager, 3 to 5 years, get your plan in place, build a team. Jason Gregor did a really good article about building a franchise and how it takes 8 to 10 years to truly rebuild a franchise to be successful again. And he was using a lot of averages, obviously, doing that article, but it was a really good article. I don't think Murray Edwards has that ability to think like we do in that sense, because he wants his revenue, he wants his businesses to be successful, and that's honestly what I think about where the Flames are going right now. Is I think you see a little success, it's time to double down, and it's time to go to the playoffs.
Yeah, and since he's taken over as owner, there's only been one time that the Flames have truly, quote unquote, rebuilt, and that was in 2013. And that was the lockout shortened year when they ended up trading Jerome and Jay Bouwmeester. They lose Mika Kiprasov. And then they have the 13-14 season where they get the 4th overall pick. They take Sam Bennett. Yep. And then the next year, they end up making the playoffs. Like 14-15 is pretty much 24-25 where we are right now. And then he throws in the towel on the rebuild. He says, it's over. We're ready to contend. First round pick, second round pick for Dougie Hamilton. Let's sign Michael Frolik to a big free agent contract. You know, let's trade a 3rd round pick for Brandon Bollig. Like, let's do all this stuff. And it didn't work. I mean, but in his mind, it might have worked because the Flames, you know, they got 2 Pacific Division titles out of it. But what do they have to show for it in the playoffs? They won 1 round. Well, I guess they won 2 against Vancouver and then Dallas. And the furthest they made in the second round was to Game 5 in both years. But I guess to Murray, I guess that's success, which I don't really understand. But, you know, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And that's what the Flames did in the past. It wouldn't surprise me if we see that sort of thing happen again this summer.
It's a decade later and it's the same damn story, because last year would have been like 13-14. The Flames were not very good. They struggled. They couldn't win hockey games. Last year, the Flames couldn't win hockey games. They struggled. They traded guys away. They got a high draft pick, and we're right back at it again this season, where if he sees any sort of success, it's going to be, let's get the Bolligs, let's get the Froliks, let's get whatever else you need, the Brian Elliott's, let's go. And it's a decade later, and we're kind of seeing the same script play out a little bit here. So it's a little scary, to be honest, and we'll see how it rolls out for the Flames here and for Craig Conroy. I really hope, I've said it on this podcast before, I really hope, because it sounds like it's supposed to be different, I really hope that Murray Edwards lets it be different and lets Craig actually put together what the plan is that he presented Murray Edwards in the first place to become the general manager and to sell him on this retooling, restructuring of the Calgary Flames. We'll see how that works out here. Robert, we'll beat that topic to death if I let it, or if you let it, because we could go on and on and on about Flames rebuilding here. What's another storyline that you're looking at for 2025 for this current edition of the Calgary Flames?
Well, you mentioned his name when we were having that discussion there, and that's Rasmus Andersson. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with him, because really, I mean, there's 2 options. There's, you sign him to a long-term contract this summer, or you trade him. There's no way in hell you ever get to the point where Rasmus Andersson is a free agent in 2026, just like they did with Johnny Gaudreau back in 2022. Mm-hmm. You cannot let it get to that point. So what are they going to do? I mean, based off what Craig Conroy said the other day on Flames Talk, I mean, his quote was, Rasmus Andersson is a Calgary Flame. And when he says something like that, to me, that says, all right, this guy, he's here for the long haul. And I think the Calgary Flames are going to do everything in their power to sign him to an 8-year extension. But does Rasmus want to stay? Does he like the direction the team is going? Like, does Rasmus want to be on a true contender? Because if he does, Calgary's probably not going to be the place for that. Yep. Even in 2026, I still think the Flames are a long way away from being a true contender. So does Rasmus see that and go, you know, is the grass greener on the other side? Like, do I want to go on long playoff runs? Do I want to have a legit shot at Stanley Cup? And if the answer to that is yes, and he asks for a trade, well, then it's going to be fascinating to see, you know, what they can get for him. I think the whole story around Rasmus Andersson is just going to be fascinating. And, you know, if he does re-sign, like, is he a future captain of the team? Like, there's so many different kind of elements to this story that I think is going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. And I know, me personally, I think it's hard because, man, you how can you not love Rasmus Andersson? Like, the guy's awesome. Like, he just seems like an absolute beauty. He's been here forever. He's been through all the ups and downs over the past 5 years here. And you do see him as like a potential future captain. So there's kind of like that off ice intangible thing where you really respect the guy and you respect the player, but at the same time, when you're thinking about the long-term future of the Calgary Flames and, the one day you'd love to see them get to a point where they build a Stanley Cup contender, is signing a 30-year-old defenseman to an 8-year contract with probably an AAV at or above $8 million. Does that make sense long-term for the Flames? So what happens with Rasmus Andersson, I think, is just going to be so interesting, and one that I'm really looking forward to see how it plays out.
And one that I hope plays out sooner than later. Like, this should be a conversation, in my opinion, the Flames have headed to this trade deadline. And I know he's got the rest of this year and next year on his contract, but he really should have a feel for the direction of this team, for what he wants and where he is at in his career right now. So I think that if he doesn't want to be part of the long term, if he wants to go and be on a contender, you try to trade him this trade deadline and get that extra playoff run for a team out of them, up that price a little bit for a potential return for Rasmus Andersson. Of course, that's just my opinion on the matter. I keep going back and forth on whether to sign Rasmus Andersson or not, given the point that you've made. He'll be 30 when that contract kicks in. Where are the Flames going to be at? They have a lot coming up the pipeline of guys who could play the role that Rasmus is, but at the same time, Rasmus could be the next Michael Backlund, where he is that long-term tenured Flame, potential one jersey over his career, captain, the whole 9 yards. And the guy's an absolute incredible hockey player and a super nice guy. So there's a lot to both sides of Rasmus Andersson to this conversation. What does he want? What do the Flames want? It's going to be fascinating, like you mentioned, how this plays out over however long it takes to play out. I just hope that the Flames make the decision. If he's going to be here long term, great. Let's get him signed as soon as you can, which would be July 1st. Or if he's not going to be here, then maximize the return for the asset. And you can definitely do that at this trade deadline. There are going to be teams who would love to add a Rasmus Andersson. I'm sure there'll be like 12, 13 teams that'll line up for this guy. They'll have assets that they'll pay for this guy if you choose to move on for him. We'll see how it plays out. It's a very interesting conversation to have between Rasmus Andersson and what he can be for this Flames team.
Go
ahead.
I was just gonna ask you one question here. So, like, there's always people that say, like, fan bases and own teams overrate their own players. Do you think we overrate how good Rasmus Andersson is here in Calgary?
Oh, definitely. I definitely think people do. But I look at it, if I try to take my bias out of it, I look at it, this is a guy who's a right-handed shot guy who can play on a top pairing in the National Hockey League. Second pair at worst. And so that should fetch you a nice prospect and a first-round draft pick type of package, at least back for the guy. But I definitely think there are some in the media, not to mention any networks of sport, who definitely overrate this guy like he is that top 10 type of defenseman in the National Hockey League. I don't think he's quite top 10 there, but he's definitely one of the better defensemen in the league.
What have you thought of his game recently? Because, I mean,
he struggled.
Like those first, 7 to 8 games of the season, he was arguably like a top 5 defenseman in the NHL. And then I would say the last 2 months, in my opinion, his game's kind of dropped off. Have you sort of seen the same thing?
Absolutely. I don't see him as engaged offensively like we did at the beginning of this season here. I don't know why that is. I think Ball's also struggled, which might make up for some of that as well. And part of it just might be teams have learned how the Flames are approaching from the back end, and about how Rasmus Andersson's approaching this hockey game. And he is probably a guy that a lot of these other teams are focusing on when they game plan against Calgary Flames. They don't have these big game breakers. And so if you take away their big defenseman and another guy, you shut the Flames down for the most part. And so he might be trying to work through that a little bit more. Not making excuses for the guy, because he hasn't been Rasmus Andersson that we know and we love here. And there's a lot of pressure on the guy too. He's carrying this Flames defensive core, and Mackenzie Weegar continues to play with a off the heat pile from the press box. He gets a revolving door. So Rasmus Anderson's taking on all the toughest matchups. Mackenzie Weegar still trying to figure it out because he has a new guy. It seems like every game on his other side, he's flopping back and forth between which side of the ice he's playing on. So Rasmus Anderson's taking a lot of the heavy lifting on, and that might be affecting his game. But he definitely has struggled. But I definitely still think he is a big part of this Flames team. And this Flames team, if they're going to have success, he's going to also have to be part of that success.
Yeah. I put it out there on Twitter today, just asking people like what they thought of Rasmus Anderson's game. And the reason I did that is because I was doing some research for an article I'm going to write about Yegor Sharangovich. And I was just looking up stats since Yegor returned to the lineup. And I realized that Rasmus Anderson, like the numbers say, he's really struggled. Like, he's got 7 points in his last 29 games, which is like a 20-point pace over 82. He's a team worst minus 13 since October 29th. And then at 5-on-5, the Flames have been outscored 22-15 with him on the ice. And, all of his underlying numbers are below 50%. And I was just like, I did not realize that it had fallen off like quite that much. Because, like you said, like I've been watching like Kevin Ball and Anderson. I do think their game's taken a step back over the last month or so here. I didn't realize it's to that extent though, but like you said, man, it's hard to be critical of the guy because he plays the most minutes. He's given the toughest matchups on a bad hockey team. It's like, what are we expecting Ras to do? Are we expecting him to be a top 10 defenseman in the NHL, when he plays under those circumstances? I don't think that's realistic, but just seeing those numbers and just, the eye test lately, I'm wondering like, who is Rasmus Anderson long-term here? Mm-hmm. Is he like a really good number 3? Is he a solid number 2? He's definitely not a number 1. I think we can say that safely.
Yeah, I agree.
And how long can he be that player? Is Rasmus Anderson the type of guy who's going to age well? I don't know if he is, to be totally honest. So like, do you really want to commit 8 years to a 30-year-old who's going to be a number 3 pretty much long term, even though you got Henry Muse coming, who's lighting up the OHL, leading OHL defenseman in scoring. You got Zayne Parekh coming. You got Hunter Prestevich coming. They're all right shots. They're all puck movers. Does it make sense to have Weegar, Anderson sign long term and have those 3 guys coming up in the system and not having room for them? Like those are the discussions people should be having with Rasmus Anderson. Nobody ever, like mainly in the Calgary media, nobody ever has a discussion about, well, does it make sense to trade him? Everybody's just saying, you have to keep him. You have to keep him. He's the best guy in the world. You got to keep him. Why don't we have like those like serious discussions about, hey, what would it look like if they moved on from him? You know what I mean?
And I think to add on to that conversation and to throw another angle at it is, if you're signing Rasmus Anderson, should you try to move Mackenzie Weegar? Does it make sense to have both of those guys? I think it's one of those guys, one or the other, and you build around these youth coming up. Now, the chances of all 3 of those guys you named off, Prestevich, Parekh, and Hughes, all becoming a top 4 NHL defensemen, yeah, they're slimmer. They're slimmer chances, but they're all progressing how you want them as prospects to progress. They're all having outstanding seasons to different levels and learning games at different levels. So the conversation is, if you sign Rasmus Anderson, then do you look to move Mackenzie Weegar, or do you just move on from Rasmus Anderson? It's an intriguing conversation to have, and it's one that, pardon the dogs if you guys can hear that on the podcast.
Your dog loves Rasmus Anderson. He's getting pissed at you for wanting to trade him.
I'm guessing my kids have come home from grandma's house again. So Rasmus Anderson, Mackenzie Weegar, there's a lot there. There's a lot on this defense. Or do the Flames move Mackenzie Weegar alongside Rasmus Anderson and let those 2 just anchor a defensive core that has Kevin Ball and a bunch of other kids in it? Do you go that route as well? So there's a lot of angles to come at the Rasmus Anderson conversation, but like you mentioned, you have to have that conversation. Is it worth keeping him versus is it worth moving on from Rasmus Anderson? And what's the cost benefit to both of those sides of the conversation here? Because there's pros and cons, obviously, to both ways. I love Rasmus Anderson, so it's going to be hard for me to say trade the guy. But if you take your bias hat out of it, and your fanship out of it, it makes a ton of sense as well for the Flames to move on from Rasmus Andersson, get a couple of nice assets for him, and turn the page and hope that a Hunter Brzustevich steps up or a Zayne Parekh steps up faster than you think they can, and you turn over that defense again. Or you let Murray Edwards take over and you just sign some 32-year-old for 3 years instead.
Well, like another thing that came to mind too is you're going to get a haul for Rasmus Andersson. Like his reputation around the league is phenomenal. He's a right shot. He's got, like you said, he's got a couple years left on his deal. You know, he seems like the kind of guy that you want on your team in a playoff series. So you could get you get a huge haul for him. Like I'm talking a first round pick, like an A prospect, maybe even a roster player. You can get all that for Rasmus. And then I'm wondering in the offseason, could you use a first round pick and maybe some other assets to bring in like a Jacob Chikrin style defenseman? Like I don't think the gap between Rasmus Andersson and a Jacob Chikrin is that big. Like could you even find Matt Roy in free agency to kind of replace Rasmus Andersson's minutes? Like could you take all the assets you get from Rasmus Andersson, use them for the future, and then go out in free agency and just get another Rasmus Andersson, or go out in a trade and get another Rasmus Andersson who might be younger and cheaper? Like that's another way to think about it, because a lot of people, when they have this discussion, it's, well, if you trade Rasmus Andersson, now you're looking for the next Rasmus Andersson for the next 10 years. But like, what if a Jacob Chikrin becomes available? You know, the Ottawa Senators did not get much for him in a trade. Like, I wonder if like there's going to be one of those types of guys who's available that you can get, who's maybe a little bit younger and, you know, doesn't cost all that much in the trade market. Because then you could go out and grab that guy, and then you could have all the assets you required for Rasmus Andersson, and you kind of get the best of both worlds. Like the whole idea that if you trade Rasmus Andersson, you're looking for him for the next 10 years, I don't think is true, because I don't think Rasmus Andersson is that good. Like the way guys are talking about him is like he's a number one defenseman, which he's not.
I don't like name dropping often when we talk about these conversations, but I have a name for you. There is a team in the National Hockey League right now struggling and hating life, and they should be a Stanley Cup favorite, and they're not, and there is turmoil, and they're trying to trade guys out. What if the Flames were to move on from Rasmus Andersson and go out there and find themselves a Keandre Miller to come into the Flames organization, to pair with a Mackenzie Weegar, and to be a guy like that? He's not to the level of Rasmus Andersson, but he's along the lines of guys you're talking about. An up-and-coming, 20, I believe he's 24, 25 right now. I'm not sure of his cap hit because the name just came to me off the top of my head, so I haven't had time to look it up here. But something move like that. The St. Louis Blues did that for years and years and years. Trade a guy, use the assets, and go get another guy. They did that. That's how they got Ryan O'Reilly into St. Louis. That's how they got other Jay Bouwmeester came into St. Louis, very similar ways. Trading off older, aging veterans and turning those assets into other players. I love that concept. I love doing it that way. And you have to remember, you can have all the draft picks in the world. Not all those prospects are going to work out, and you can't play them all. And so eventually you're going to have to move on from some guys and make them into other assets. And I love the idea of trading Rasmus Andersson, maximizing his value, and then using some of those assets to bring in somebody else here. I just thought that Keandre Miller name just popped into my head, and interesting name for me from a team who's struggling, and maybe there's a direct trade there as well. Maybe he's the guy that comes back in a Rasmus Andersson trade. Who knows? But that I love your idea there, Robert.
And Keandre Miller is a great name. Like he's definitely in that Jacob Chikrin type of category. Who's like a younger defenseman, maybe looking for a change of scenery. I think that makes nothing but sense. And you know, I don't want to make it sound like I'm bashing on Rasmus Andersson. Rasmus Andersson's a really good player. You know, like I said, he's like a solid 2/3 on every single team in the NHL. Guy's a really good player. It's just, for me, like when it comes to team building, I always think from an asset management standpoint, what's the best way to get the most out of your players?
Yep.
And for Rasmus Andersson, I do think in the long run it makes sense to move on from him. If Rasmus Andersson, say, was a free agent at 25, and you got him through his age 25 to 33 years, I think it would make a ton of sense to sign him to a long-term deal. Him being 30 when that deal kicks in really concerns me. I
Mhm.
don't like the idea of signing a guy like Anderson from age 30 to 38, especially when years, say, 34 to 38, those are the years when the Flames are probably going to turn into a contender. At least that's what you hope.
Yeah.
And what does Rasmus Anderson look like when he's 34 to 38 years old? And you have 35 to 36-year-old Mackenzie Weegar still under contract. What does that blue line look like? Is all of a sudden, are you spending, 15, $16 million on 35-year-old defensemen that can't keep up anymore? It's interesting to think about.
Yeah, it is. Just to set the record straight for those who are wondering, Keandre Miller has a 3.872 AAV, and he's 24 years old. So I was pretty spot on there. To your point, yeah, it's always the cost of cost balance of each side of the conversation. By no means do either of us hate Rasmus Anderson and think we should sell him off just to sell him off. This is an asset management. This is a taking your love of the player out of it and strictly looking at it from a building team viewpoint. I love Rasmus Anderson. I think he is a great defenseman. He's a great human. He's great in the community. And if he signs long term with the Flames, I'm not going to be upset as a fan of the team, as a fan of the player. But you take your viewpoint from the point of building a roster, it doesn't always make sense to sign the guy. If the Flames were closer to being that, fighting for the Pacific Division every year, in that deep conversation of deep playoff run, then yeah, double down and sign the guy because he's part of what you're doing. But they're not there in their cycle yet. So moving on from that guy might make the most sense for the Flames here.
Can I just add one more thing to this?
Yeah, go ahead.
One thing that bothers me a little bit is the idea that you have, like the Calgary Flames specifically, they have to keep players who want to be in Calgary. Like you heard Craig Conroy talk about that a lot when they signed Yegor Sharangovich. One of the first thing he said is, Yegor wanted to stay in Calgary, so we signed him. And it's like, that's not a good way to go about business. That's not a good way to go about building your team. If you want guys who want to be in Calgary, you got to build a winner. I think it's just as simple as that. And you're not going to build a winner if you're just going to end up signing, these, for Yegor Sharangovich, a middle six winger, or for Rasmus Anderson, kind of a 2-3 defenseman, signing them to contracts that are paying them like a top six forward or like a high end top defenseman. The best way to go about it is just continue to draft and develop, continue to stockpile your organization with talented players, and eventually you're going to get out of it. You're going to become a winner, and people are going to want to play for you. But just the whole idea that, because Dan Vladar wants to stay in Calgary, we have to sign him, or because Rasmus Anderson wants to stay in Calgary, we have to sign him. I don't think that's a smart way to go about building your team. I think you need to be pretty ruthless. I think you need to practice pragmatism when you're doing this kind of stuff. And just because a guy's like, oh, I like Calgary, I want to be here, doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. You definitely want players who want to be here, but at the same time, you've got to have that. Well, I'm glad you want to be here, but for us, it doesn't make sense mentality to it as well, right? So you have to have both sides of it. Just look at Edmonton, right? Nobody wanted to sign there. They built the winner, and now everybody wants to sign there. That's building a winner for me is the key there. Speaking of a winner, my next point that I wanted to bring up for 2025 is the continuation of Connor Zary at center, the evolution of how that's going to play out over the course of the back half of this season. How does he increase his role with the Flames? What can he do being a centerman? Does he get better wingers to play with him to see what more he can provide for the Flames as the centerman? I'm very fascinated to watch the growth of Connor Zary in that role, because I've quite liked a lot of what I've seen from Connor Zary. He's not always on the score sheet because he's got boat anchors playing with him at times, but he's always and he's always trying to drag guys into it, and his face-off percentage is coming up, so that he's working on the fine tuning of that position and learning under Coach Huska. I really like what we've seen from Connor Zary, and I'm really fascinated to see how he grows in that role and what he potentially can be down the road here for the Flames. Because I think if the Flames are going to be successful in 2 and 3 years from now, Connor Zary is going to be a center for this team because there's nobody else in that pipeline right now. There's nobody. All due respect to Roy Cairns, all due respect to Lipinski in the minors, there's nobody coming here for the Flames to be a top 6 center. Connor Zary seems to be the best fit there, and I'm fascinated to see how he grows in that role. And I really wish the Flames here would give him a guy or two better to play with. All due respect to Sharon Govich, Kuzmenko, and Pelche, they're just not doing it for me. And this guy is still out there doing it every single day for the Flames.
So if it were up to you, who would you have on Zary's wings right now?
I think you're stuck with Sharon Govich there, but I would really like to see Matthew Coronado there. And I know Matthew Coronado is playing very well with Backlund and Coleman. It's hard to break that line up, but I think you can fill the right side of the Coleman-Backlund line very easily with other guys on this roster. I really would like to see what Connor Zary can do with a guy who's playing with a ton of confidence right now in a Matthew Coronado, and see how those two progress together. It might fail, but it might become just absolute magic as well. Both are very equal potentials, in my opinion. And I wonder if playing with a guy like Coronado can also get Sharon Govich going a little bit. All due respect to Jacob Pelche, he's just not that for me. He's just not doing it for me. Maybe he's a guy that could spend time with Backlund and Coleman and elevate his game a little bit. But I'd like to see maybe try with Coronado to start here with Connor Zary.
I really like that idea. I think that idea makes nothing but sense. I know Coronado's been excellent with Backlund and Coleman this season, but
good.
I mean, like last night in Vegas, I would argue Coronado was their best player outside of Dan Vladar. I thought he was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Him on a line of Connor Zary would be super, super interesting, and I do hope we see that at some point, because you're right. Yegor Sharangovich right now he's arguably the least effective forward on the team. Like even less effective than like a Ryan Lomberg or Kevin Rooney right now. Like Sharangovich has been terrible lately. I don't like the idea of having your up and coming center playing with a guy like that right now. I get he might have to play there because there's really no other spot in the lineup for him right now, but he's got to get going. And I really like that idea. And the thing with the Zary at center, I like the way the Flames are using him too. Like they're giving him a ton of offensive zone starts. Like I'm on natural stat trick right now. So since November 26th, guess how many defensive zone starts Connor Zary's had at 5-on-5? And that's in 15 games. So over the last 15 games, guess how many defensive zone starts Connor Zary's had at 5-on-5?
Are you looking at numbers or percentages?
Number.
15 games. Let's go with less than 20.
3.
Okay, that's way less than 20. Wow.
Yeah. Like I'm surprised by that. Like Jacob Pelche has more offensive zone starts. Kuzmenko has more offensive zone starts. Defensive zone starts, sorry. So like they're really sheltering him, which I'm totally fine with. Because playing center, I mean, that it takes a long time to learn how to play center in the NHL. It takes a long time to learn how to take face-offs properly. Like I'm happy that they're giving the kid a long look, and so far so good. I've been pretty impressed with it. But like you said, man, like he needs better line mates, and an easy change, like such an easy change, is just to put Coronado with him and Pelchu with Backlund and Coleman. I think that makes nothing but sense. That's a really good poll by you.
The way that the Flames are using Connor Zary right now reminds me a lot of when Sean Monahan first became a Flame. When they put Sean Monahan in that third line center role, and I'm not sure he took a defensive face-off for the first year and a half he was in Calgary, because it was all heavy offensive zone starts. But he learned how to be a center. He learned how to be a pro, and he learned how to be a guy on a line that worked hard and provided what he can provide. And I think using Connor Zary in a similar situation would benefit him a lot, and it has, I think, in my opinion. I wish there was a better option on the left side, and all due respect to Sharon Govich, because I love the player. I wish he wasn't struggling like he is. I just wish there was another left winger he could put with Zary and Coronado and let them ride. But for right now, why you have a duo that you might be able to get going here. And all due respect to other guys in the lineup, there's really nobody else that could help elevate Zary like that. That you don't want to break these other lines up. Like you finally have Huberdeau and Kadri going with Pospisil. You don't want to break that up, and so you have limited options here because there's no one coming up from the minors that's going to elevate this lineup. All due respect to the Karens and the Klapkas and those guys, they're not going to come up here and elevate this lineup. So it's you got to find guys that you have right here in house to help elevate it. And I think moving Coronado with Zary does a lot for both of those guys, both high confidence players, offensive zone starts. They could be a handful for some teams here. Both play with good pace and have great shots. I think there's some magic there. So I really like how the Flames are progressing with Connor Zary, and I'd like to see more from him. Robert, moving on here, is there another headline, another topic, storyline that you're watching for the Flames in 2025?
No, I mean, I think we covered most of them. I mean, another one that kind of comes to mind here is what sort of guys are we going to see make their NHL debuts? So a couple that come to mind are, William Stromgren, Rory Cairns. The one guy, I mean, I mentioned it a few times on the pod, but I think it's going to be super interesting to see if Adar Suniev gets a chance to play NHL games after his college year. He's playing really well in the NCAA. He had a hat trick over the weekend. Like, the kid's dominating. Will we see Sam Morton? Will we see Hunter Brstevich? Will we see Artem Grushnikov? I wonder how many of those guys are going to get a chance to make their NHL debuts. And one guy, I mean, when it comes to William Stromgren, he's a guy that I wouldn't mind seeing getting a shot pretty soon here, because I do think there's a spot for him in the top 9.
With Connor Zary?
You could put him on the wing with Connor Zary. If you could do like a Stromgren, Zary, Sharon Govich line, move Pelche down to the 4th line, send Walker Dewar to the minors, put Kuzmenko in the rafters. All of a sudden, you give Stromgren an opportunity to play in the top 9. I think that's something that makes a lot of sense for this team to take a look at here. But I would say, that's the only other thing that I'll probably be keeping my eye on.
Yeah, there's not a lot of guys that really spark my interest, I guess is the wrong way to put it, that really have made a big push to be on the Flames this year. So I wonder if we see like 3 or 4 guys get cycled up here at the end of the season to get their debuts, to get a game or 2 in, just to see what they are for the Flames and in the organization. I like some of those names you put out there. Stromgen's a good one. Suniev's a really good one. Does he come out of college? Does Hunter Brstevich get a call up? Any of those kind of guys. It'd be interesting to watch how the Flames work that at the end of the year here. The last topic for me that I wanted to bring up here, and I just wanted to get your feel for this player. Where are you at with Jacob Pelche? Where are you at with the Flames' uses of Jacob Pelche? Is this a last kick of the can for you? Because for me, Jacob has only been okay in spots. And I'm really disappointed actually in what I've seen from Jacob Pelche since his latest recall. He had the one decent hockey game. He's really just been a passenger a lot up and down on 3rd, 4th lines. Where are you at with Jacob Pelche? Your expectations for him? Or are we done with the player here?
Maybe I'm biased when it comes to it, but I've actually really liked what I've saw from Jacob Pelche so far. I like the speed. I like the sort of tenacity. I like him on the penalty kill. I like kind of like the infectious like attitude he has. Like you see him on the bench, like he's always like hyping his teammates up. Like you can tell he's a leader in that locker room, despite the fact that he's barely played any NHL games. I guess I'm just cheering for the guy, man. I just really hope he does end up making it. I like the fact that Ryan Huska is giving him an opportunity in the top 9. Like in my opinion, like I saw some people saying like the Zary line over the last couple of games hasn't done anything, and I really believe that the big reason for that is Yegor Sharangovich right now. Yeah, pucks are dying on his stick. He's not able to make any plays at the moment, and I think that's really hurting his line mates, including Jacob Pelche. I just think I think Pelche's been more effective than Kuzmenko. I think he's been more effective than Sharangovich recently. I think he's a better player than Walker Dewar. I think he does deserve to be on this NHL team. I'm liking what I'm seeing. I kind of like the defensive profile. Like I said, I like the penalty killing. I really hope that they continue to give him a long look, because last year was a complete write-off from an injuries perspective, and
Yeah.
I don't think it's
Yeah.
smart to give up on a 23-year-old player who's coming off a ruined season from injuries. Like I believe that Jacob Pelche can be a third line NHL winger, and I think he could do it for, maybe not forever, but I think he could probably be a third line winger on the Flames for, the next 3 to 6 years, whatever it may be. So I think I'm a little higher on him than you. I understand like where you're coming from, but at the same time, I think he's been pretty effective so far, and I just think he's going to continue to keep getting better, and hopefully they find the perfect spot for him in the lineup moving forward.
I think a lot of us, myself included, are guilty of maybe having too high of expectations of Jacob. The pedigree of being a first round draft pick, one of the first guys picked after the last rotation of guys coming through that you want to see have success with the Flames. I wonder that's probably a big part of why I'm not a fan of the guy at the moment, is maybe the bias of that first round pick, the expectations being too high. So I hope he does succeed, though, because if he can find himself in a good third line role for this Flames, that's a big win for him. It's a big win for this Flames, a team that I don't think has a lot of depth to it right now. And if he can find a game here and find some consistency to his game, I think that's a really nice role for him. That third line, I think, is a good spot for him if he can find that game as well. I really also wonder what a Pelche, Coronado, Zary line might look like, just to maybe put Sharon Govich with Coleman and Backlund to maybe calm his game down, because it's not been great from Sharon Govich there. So just some ideas I had as well.
And like Pelche, he'll need to step up his game eventually, like to the point where he's like a no doubt about it NHLer, because the Flames, they have a lot of wingers in their system. Like you take a look at it, like we talked about Stromgren, we talked about Adar Sunia potentially coming in. You got guys like Luke Misa, just taking a look here, Matvey Gridin, Sam Honzig. Like there's a lot of wingers that are gonna be coming up in the system here, and Pelche's got to secure that spot in the lineup, because if he does it, there's gonna be a lot of guys nipping at his heels there for that spot in the Flames middle six.
Absolutely. All right, Robert, going to throw it over to you. Anything else that you want to throw out there on the podcast? Those are all of my headlines, my storylines that I'm watching for the Flames. Anything else you wanted to bring up on the show today, or if we covered everything?
The only thing I wanted to get your opinion on, because I just thought it was an interesting story, is the whole Zayne Parekh, social media antics.
Oh, yes.
What did you make of all that? And for those that don't know, Canada lost to Latvia in a shootout a few nights ago, and a whole bunch of guys that didn't make the Canadian World Junior team were liking posts that showed that Canada lost. Zayne Parekh had retweeted a couple clips of Cale Makar and Quinn Hughes walking the blue line, saying like, Canada, you need a defenseman to walk the blue line on the power play. So, Michael Misa, Carter Yakimchuk, Zayne Parekh, those guys, they were not happy about being left off that team, and they showed it on social media over the weekend. So I was just curious, what did you make of that?
A couple of things for me. I love the confidence in the player to know and be upset that he didn't make Team Canada. I love that he was upset over it, because it kind of shows that he's driven to prove that was the wrong decision. And then I'm always a fan of being a little bit petty when things come up. If you can do it in a tasteful way, I guess would be a way to put it. I don't mind
petty
it
in a tasteful
all.
way. I like that.
Yeah, he was just subtle in his pettiness. Just, I'm just gonna retweet this. Just throw a little like on this Instagram post and say nothing else. I like that, because it's just throwing a little bit of shades that you guys know what you should have done and you didn't do it. And so he has the motivation of making Team Canada to continue pushing his season, and he's having a decent season now in Saginaw now that he's settled in here. But I also like being a little bit petty, so going, yeah, I could have fixed that problem for you, but you chose to go elsewhere.
I would imagine the Flames and his agent probably weren't too happy with him doing that. That's for sure.
It does also, I can see this other side where people are like, it's a little bit immature, but you got to remember, this is an 18-year-old kid too, right? They're all going to be a little bit immature.
For sure. And like when you think about hockey, like it is entertainment. The NHL is specifically meant to entertain us. And the NHL needs a lot more personality in the future, now and in the future. And if guys like Zayne Parekh can add a little bit of spice to it on social media, I think it's fantastic for the future of the game. I think and the NHL and their club teams take themselves way too seriously. I think the players take themselves way too seriously. Like I said, this is entertainment.
Yep.
It's supposed to be fun. You're supposed to put on a show. It's, and doing things like, being a little petty about not making the team and dunking on them when they lose to Latvia in the biggest upset in World Junior history. I think it's good, man. I think it's fun. I think it's entertaining. I think it's great for hockey and the NHL moving forward. I think this sport is just way too buttoned up, way too kind of white collar, shirt, tie. They just take themselves so seriously, and enough is enough. Time to start having fun and start showing some personality. And I think Parekh's kind of doing that right now. So I got no problem with it personally.
And as fun as the World Juniors are, this country acts like it is the all and be all of hockey glory, right? Like this is as high as the Stanley Cup. Like we take this tournament way too seriously. Have a bit of fun with it. Let these kids be kids as well. And if they got personality, great. If they want to be that guy who's a brick, fine. But let the guys with personality shine through. People hate guys like Drew Doughty or Brad Marchand. I love them because they bring personality to the game. They let it shine forward. You might not always like what they do on the ice, but you know that they're going to be good for a quote. You know that they're fun and they're having a good time with it, because who likes to go to work every day and just be bored and boring and one answered and white collared shirts and button up tie? It's boring. Have a little personality, enjoy it. So Zayne Parekh, whatever, like a Instagram post. Let's move on here, because Team Canada really looked terrible in that game versus Latvia, and it was more than a guy walking the power play was the problem. They did a lot of things in that game against Latvia that were a problem, and that game should never have been close. They just couldn't do anything that they should have done in the hockey game, and Zayne Parekh was right to throw shades because he should be there. He is better than 2/3 of those defensemen that are at that Team Canada, and I'll say that, and I'll leave that there. Robert, you mentioned there is an article coming up on Sharon Govich for you at flamesnation.ca. Tell us about it. Tell us about what else is coming up and where these folks can find you.
Yeah, I got a series of articles coming up just about looking forward to 2025, kind of like what we discussed today. I got one on the struggles of Yegor Sharangovich coming out, and then also I'm going to look at are the Washington Capitals a model for the Calgary Flames to follow? And that's not me saying I want that to happen, but more so, is that something the Calgary Flames would consider doing? So lots of fun stuff coming your way at flamesnation.ca.
It's funny how the narrative switches so quick from let's do the Dallas model to now let's do the Washington model. Interesting. Looking forward to those articles, Robert. Follow Robert at Ring of Fire CGY across social media. I'm at Vintage Johnny 84. Of course, the Red Mile Rundown across all your social media platforms. Appreciate you guys for your downloads. Hopefully you all have a wonderful New Year. Celebrate it. Be responsible, please. Everyone out there, there's lots of Ubers and taxis for you all to use, or stay at a buddy's house. Enjoy the New Year. Enjoy the hockey this week. We'll be back with you next week on the Red Mile Rundown.